Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Wesley Goldwell. I guess I'm here to teach you a little bit about entrepreneurship, tell you my story, where I come from, what I did, what I do. It took me a little while to figure out what is it exactly that I can tell you that would be impactful and useful. So I think what would help if you would turn this into more of a panel. So feel free to raise your hand often, but not too often. And if you have a question, we'll digress and address your questions. I think it would be beneficial if I could tackle some of those questions. So a little bit about me. I'll start from the middle. I started my career at Nokia, back when Nokia was a household brand, back when people actually recognized what it was. I was with them through the thick and thin, heights, and then eventually the bottoms, when it all fell apart, closer to late 2000s, early 2010s. I pretty much consulted and worked for every telecom company you can imagine. I was on the iPhone 4 team when it actually leaked. I was at the bar where the phone was lost. Luckily for me, it wasn't anyone I worked with or knew. How many of you actually, raise your hand if you know what iPhone 4 is, or you've seen one? Okay? Okay, good. I was just worried on the way here. I was like, is iPhone 4 still relevant? So yeah, and then after that I went and got my MBA. That encouraged me to to fund a startup, I found a startup, and then eventually quit the startup and sold the startup and went to work for Amazon. So I'll be able to cover some corporate aspects for you guys, as well as more raw startup experiences and theories and whatnot. So feel free to speak up. That's my LinkedIn, a bit of a marketing pitch for you. You can always add me to stay connected, to follow up, or just talk to me after the class. Whatever works for you. I actually, before all that, I was actually spent quite a lot of time in Kiev. I went to ICU, International Christian University. It doesn't exist anymore. I speak хорошо по-русски, непогано українською, але these days it's really hard for me to switch between the languages. I kind of try to stick with one and know best. I also have some more boilerplate material for you guys to look at. I think earlier today you saw the adoption curve and some other things. I wanted to talk to you briefly about term sheets, Series A, Series B, convertible notes. I think on the very high level, we can spend a little bit of time because it's important, especially for an entrepreneurship class. It will give you a good understanding of what those things are, what to look for, what to watch out for, most importantly, so you don't become the victims or other entrepreneurs don't take advantage of you, or most importantly, VCs, private equity firms, angel investors, etc., etc. Okay. Where do we start? Does anyone have a question? Does anyone have anything they think we should cover in today's class more so? Raise your hand. Be brave. I'm gonna start randomly calling out people. Would you guys like to hear more about corporate experiences in the U.S.? Would you like to hear more about startup experiences, maybe specific questions you had? So think about that. And in the meantime, I thought I would spend a couple of minutes and tell you more about my experience, a transitional experience coming from Ukraine, from Kiev, and moving to the United States, and some of the things that I wish I knew when I was here, and some of the things I wish I knew when I was there. And I think I would imagine a lot of you are here because ultimately you want to be entrepreneurs, ultimately you want to have those international experiences. And for that you're going to need to travel, for that you're going to need some exposure outside of Kiev, outside of Ukraine. I was lucky enough to have traveled to over 70 countries. I continue to travel as much as I possibly can. I think with every country I go to, it helps me understand the perspective a little better. Today I build a lot of products, and I think for a product manager it's also very important to keep an open mind. One of the challenges today when we I want to spend a little bit of time also to give you a more holistic approach, a global approach instead of focusing on Ukraine. I wanted to tell you about areas that are dominant in certain regions around the world and how you can position yourself strategically so you can take the most benefit of that global environment. The world we live in today is very different from the world I lived in 20 years ago. The world we live in today is very globalized. We live in an environment where you could just go to anywhere you want. You no longer have to go to Detroit. You no longer have to retrain a certain set of population because you can go anywhere you want and hire people to get the job done. Some areas are more prevalent to particular industries than others, and we're going to briefly talk about that. For example, if you want manufacturing, it's going to be China. If you want services, it's going to be some other place. Then we'll touch on that as well, excuse me. But most importantly, I think if you're here because you're looking for that international experience, and more likely I would imagine it's a business experience, because if you wanted to be engineers, you would have ended up in KPI. If you wanted to be doctors, you would have ended up in Bogomoltsa, right? And so on. And you're here because you're trying to learn English, you're trying to take advantage of the global market in one way or another. Does that make sense? Raise your hand if I need to speak slower. Okay, good. Okay, I'll start with an easy one for me. When I was in my first year at ICU, which was pretty similar to where you guys are, I decided not to do much with my summer during the first year and just to stick around, and which was fine, but it's not until I think the second year I heard about such programs. At the time they were called Work and Travel US, Camp USA, and I'll do a little bit of pitch on that. I'm not sure how much of that is being advised to you on the university level, but those programs are actually pretty life-changing. A lot of you would experience a first-hand job in the very blue-collar market. Usually it's a service, but it's okay. It's a very fast and raw way to get that experience. Very good way to learn the culture, very good way to understand the values. And it doesn't have to be in the US really. If you really want to, you could go to Europe, you can go to any Western country, but being in the language, in the country of that language is definitely going to help you propel and excel in what you do. Do you guys, does anyone tell you about those programs? Do you even have them anymore? Who's looked at those programs yet? Because maybe it doesn't happen until you're in year 2. What have you learned, sir? What's your name, sir?
Yeah, my name is Yusuf. We have such program in the summer in July. It's named the Global Innovation Program in New Jersey. But it's more benefits for students who study in second or third year. Because you need to have innovation idea and prepare it and try to make it in ESL.
But you're taking the entrepreneurship class now, so you could probably try to be innovative and put something together. Anyone else? So that's a good one. Thank you, Yosef. Innovation. The innovation program in what country?
In New Jersey, in USA.
In New Jersey, USA. Okay. What has anyone heard of any other programs? No one ever heard of Work and Travel. Do they do those anymore?
We've heard that we didn't investigate enough for ourselves.
Do you know anything about Natalia, sorry, do you guys know anything about those programs, or you?
It was popular.
It was popular 5 years ago. You're too late.
No one speaks about it. Well,
Yeah.
people are interested.
Like Work and Travel USA and Work and Travel in general.
In our university, we have research opportunity, but our students want lots, not so popular.
Not so popular. I wonder why. Interesting. Well, anyways, Yusuf brought up a good point. A lot of times they discourage you from considering those programs. How many of you does the Flex still exist, right?
Yeah.
Flex. Okay, raise your hand if you studied last year, or 10th grade, or now they're 12th grades, I guess. If you studied for a year outside of Ukraine, if you took advantage of the Flex program. Okay, what countries was it in? What state, city?
Well, Canada it is.
Oh, okay.
I spent 2 years there studying for architecture, to be honest. But yeah.
Okay, architecture. Good. Was it so it was a high school, right? Or was it a community
No,
college?
it was a college.
Okay, nice.
I just didn't like the program, so I returned.
Oh, what city in Canada?
What was it? Cambridge?
Okay, I wouldn't like it either. Well, it's a small city, and that brings me to another advice, something I've learned, which took a very long time. When I moved to the U.S., I initially spent 6 years in Dallas, 2 years in Austin. Then I moved to California, spent about 7 years, some lived in Orange County, then LA. After 7 years, also lived for 2 years in Sydney, and then I moved to San Francisco, where I'm at today. But one of the things I wish I knew, of course you get in anywhere you can. It's just the opportunity that presents itself, and you have to take advantage of it. But you want to go to a bigger city. Bigger cities is where people are more open-minded, more interesting, more global. There are more opportunities to learn, more opportunities to connect. And that's something I wish someone told me when I was in Dallas, which is not the smallest city out there, but they're definitely better places. Yusuf, you spent a year as well, right?
To be honest, I'm not from Ukraine, so I study here 3 years in Ukraine already, and I study in Algeria before.
Oh, nice. Okay. What did you study?
To be honest, I was in Miss. I study medical, then I lost it, but I study informatics. And the best way to find myself was to travel, so I decided to come to Ukraine. I studied 1 year Ukrainian language, and now I find myself in business, and I like it.
Okay, yes, definitely. So, would you say that everyone who's in this school, in this class, is hoping to come out of this as a business person, as a businessman, woman of sorts? Is that pretty much okay? Well, I would imagine that's why you're learning, studying the language to be able to compete on a global scale. Isn't that the case? Okay, good. So, someone else raised his or her hand. I didn't see. There was a third person I know for sure that wasn't Flex, or no? No one wants to admit. So I recommend highly seek out those opportunities, and even when they tell you it's not for the first year, quite frankly, I wish I did it sooner. Something that they don't really tell you much in school is that when you immigrate to a new environment, which is a part of the journey, whether you choose to come back at some point or you don't, it's the experience that matters, and when you choose that experience, when you immigrate to another locale, the younger you do that, the easier it is to adjust to the local culture. The easier it is to pick up the language and languages. If, for example, you go to Switzerland, you may need more than one. At least four. Yeah, there we go. And it kind of propels you for success much better. For example, someone who moved to the U.S. I moved to the U.S. when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I know a lot of people that moved when they were 17. They had a much easier journey because they were a little younger. Someone who moved there 14, 15, it was a little easier, even easier because they studied in the high school and were able to acclimate to the new environment much faster. And then I have friends that are moving in their 30s, 35s, and of course, it's a much more different ballgame. So even though it doesn't seem like a year would matter, but I'd say for a summer experience, it does, and you should try to take advantage of it to the fullest. But that's just my opinion. The second, we already talked about Any questions so far? Yes.
Where are you from?
So it was actually a small. So I'm Jewish Bulgarian, but I grew up in a small town. It's not that small, outside of Odessa, called Nikolai. Yeah.
It's not that.
I've heard this.
It's not that small, yeah, but it's all relative,
It's
right?
like a regional center.
Yeah, but still, like in comparison to even this, yeah.
Yeah. You have to go. Sorry, yes, I'll come back to it. You have to go down to. You have to say it's in Ukraine. It's not Kiev. It's near Odessa. That's it. But no. There are smaller places, and I think the smaller the place, the more interesting is the journey itself. So let's put it that way. Yosef?
Sir, can you tell us about the Amazon values, please?
Oh, sure. There are 14 of them, 11. Can someone? So one of the things they had to memorize us the values at Amazon. Every company has values that they put on the pamphlet and then attach to the wall.
Yes.
A lot of it is to build the culture. I'm not, by no means I'm a conspiracy theorist, but you have to think of it as a bit of a Kool-Aid in the sense that creating the culture just helps people stay together and be together, and it's very important. So in a sense, anywhere you go, every establishment, every company is going to try to put those values in place so individuals can team up and move forward together, and then years later they come to be the alumni of that organization. For example, at ICU, International Christian University, we had values there, a set of values that we had to memorize, and then years go by, and then you meet up your classmates and you connect on those values. But to answer your question, probably the biggest ones are agility, and I think the most important one for anyone coming from Eastern Europe is ethics. I think Ukraine is improving in that sense, but it's going to be even a much better place once ethics is going to be elevated, emphasized, and improved. And I think that's where the gap between the S&P 500, Western companies, and the companies in developing countries is where the level of ethics is not on the global level, and that's what's important. Does it? And I'm sure you guys understand what ethics is, right?
Yes, yes.
Oh, someone was trying to explain to me the other day what schema was, and I was like, what does it mean? Yeah, and it
That's
was,
our like personal etiquette here.
yeah. So it took about 30 minutes. The poor person was trying to explain to me how it works, and you have to find and that was definitely an interesting concept. So where there's no schemas, let's put it that way. I actually can pull up. It's really interesting for you. I can pull up. At some point, some of you, I'm sure, may end up working for a company, for Amazon or a company like Amazon. It's actually a really good question. I can pull up and show the values they talk about. Do you want to put it up on the screen? Can you pull up the Amazon values? It's going to share your screen because I don't have internet set up on mine. So we'll come back to that, and I'll walk you through some of the things they teach us in a company like that. Okay, let me see what else I can share with you.
Do you just want the Wi-Fi password?
Oh, no, just go pull it. I'm just going to do that on the laptop. Let's see how it works. It should be, they're called Amazon Principles. Should I try Amazon Principles? I think that's going to be better. I was going to spend a little bit of time to talk to you guys about incubators, accelerators. How many of you have heard of those establishments? Raise your hand. Oh wow, okay, we should definitely talk about those. How many of you have ever thought about at some point starting a business, opening a startup, creating an innovative idea? Okay, that's one, good. Okay. Oh, yeah. This is a good one. Also, let's see if we can pull it up. So let's talk a little bit about that. I think it will be very useful. There's a whole world out there, and you should be able to apply your knowledge, apply your skills that you gain here in the real world, and that would be opening up your own company or maybe teaming up with others to start a company. There are some basic principles that everyone should know, and that's why I wanted to show you the term sheets and the Series A. Does anyone know what IPO is? Okay, good. So I see the same. Series A, Series B, seed. Okay, crowdfunding. Okay, good. So I see like 5 people know, so maybe we'll touch on a little bit on all of them individually. So back to Yosef's question. So we had, this is Amazon 14 leadership principles, and they actually quiz us on these when you start. Every time we interview someone, there is a very specific process at Amazon that I've never seen in any other company I work for. It's probably the most intense hiring process I've experienced working for any company, because they got it down to the T on how they want and what kind of people they want. And most importantly, they have the pre-interview packet that you have to read about the candidate. Then they have individual interviews, and then at the end they have like a debrief where everyone meets up and votes. And if for whatever reason it's an even vote, if the candidate is 50-50 and they're not sure, they're what they call on the fence about the candidate, they would decide to pass on the candidate just because they don't want to take that risk. So it's very, you have to come in very trained and know what they want. So for example, Amazon follows these principles. One of them is customer obsession, and they explain what that is. You see that behind me? Or do we need to zoom in? Yeah, I think I could zoom in a little bit. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, customer obsession, ownership, so this customer obsession, it's the most important principle. Basically everything we do has to start with the customer, and we have this process called working backwards. So at the end of the day, if we disagree on certain decisions in the meeting, we would go back and say, okay, how does it align against the principles? And then how does it most importantly align against customer obsession? So for example, we're launching a product and we want to build a feature. We would look and see, at the end of the day, does this feature benefit the customer or not? And that's going to be the driving principle. Ownership, that one's pretty straightforward. You look at things like, if you're the owner of the product, I will take full responsibility and do whatever it takes for the product to succeed. It's actually very frustrating, especially in my experience, because I worked with so many different people from all over, whether it's Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Poland, Ukraine. A lot of Eastern and Southern Europeans, they have a hard time admitting the fault, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay, but it seems like there's a lot of historic pride, especially in my generation, a little older, growing up, going through the breakup of Soviet Union and the 90s. A lot of people are having a hard time to admit that maybe I did something a little wrong, maybe I could have done it a little better, and just simply say, won't happen again. And really a lot of times it doesn't matter, but the fact that people have a hard time admitting those things takes away from their personality, from their professionalism, and I highly encourage considering those as learning experiences and try to figure out how you can be a better employee or a team member through that growth, through admitting that something could have been done better, especially in very early stages of your careers. Invent and simplify. This one's pretty interesting. They want to make sure that we improve the process on constantly on regular basis, and also we keep it simple, right? A lot of times, especially in companies like Amazon, when we have about, I think, 600,000 people, if you include all the delivery personnel. So 600,000 people around the world, which is an amazing, it's bigger than Mykolaiv. So 600,000 people work for Amazon, and there's a lot of process, and sometimes it's unnecessary, and a lot of times it's bureaucratic. And again, a lot of that is especially was dominant back in Soviet countries, communist countries, or countries with a lot of process in general. And you want to make sure that the process in place is very efficient. And you are, as managers, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, should always figure out how to make the process better and simpler, and invent new steps. You are right a lot. That's basically statistical, making sure that sure, we'll keep an eye on you, but you better be right more than you're wrong. And again, the rule of thumb is you better be right at least 55-60% of the time. Sure, there's going to be some times you're not right, but it's okay. You need to be inquisitive enough and strong enough to ask, to try, to give opinion, and to do your best. And as long as you're right more than you're wrong, then you'll win. Learn and be curious. That's the one that's continued growth. I think it's pretty straightforward. You wouldn't be here. Today you wouldn't be here unless it were your parent. It was for your parents that told you, like, hey, you got to go to school, you got to get your degree. We're going to pay for your first year, second year, maybe your entire undergrad, but you're on your own. But for the most part, most of you are here because your parents told you so. That's why I went to school.
I'm very conscious.
That's good, but you should be curious and learn to be curious, right, and learn to grow. And this is very important. This is why I encouraged you to look into work and travel, because it's not going to be as fun as going to, I don't know, it's no longer Crimea, now it's Odessa for summer holidays or overseas. It's going to be work, but it's going to be an experience that's going to help you grow professionally and personally. Hire and develop best, we talked about it. It's a very thorough hiring process. They want to make sure that whoever we hire is going to be able to learn, is going to be able to be a good candidate for the family. It goes back to the values. Values is kind of when you think of McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Bain, it's a family that stays together for a very long time, and it's something that you're going to put on your resume and take advantage, not just for that one job, but for future jobs as well. Bear with me, we've got about 14 more to go. Insist on high standards. That's when you basically want to be a perfectionist without saying that word. Want to make sure that the results you deliver are above average. For example, we'll go back to the hiring process. Normally you have a hiring manager and a handful of people, team members, SMEs, or what we call it subject matter experts, that participate in the interview process. And so there's also one person called bar raiser. And it's usually an outsider who has no influence, no opinion about the process. Their entire job is to make sure when people get interviewed, the candidates get interviewed, that the candidate is better than 50% of existing employees in that position. So if for whatever reason that person is not better, then his job is he's basically going to say no and the person is not going to get the job. So it's kind of like an everlasting high standards mechanism that put in place. Think big, that one's pretty important. A lot of times people get caught up in daily routine. A lot of times employees get caught up in short-term milestones instead of thinking what is it that really matters, right? So the short-term milestone is going out on a date. The long-term milestone is not failing the class. So you wanna make sure you think big, because maybe failing the class is going to prevent you from graduating sooner and then going on taking advantage of some really cool job in some really cool place. We got about 2 or 3 more left. Did you guys have any questions as we move forward for me or for these things, or we can try it again after we're done with the list? Bias for action, that's pretty straightforward. They want to make sure that if you see that something's wrong, right, you're not going to wait for someone else to fix it. You're actually going to try to escalate it and get it done. And you don't really need to write these down. If you want to, you could, but a lot of them you can just search for Amazon principles, and they're going to be available. A lot of times, especially in big corporations, when I was at Nokia, I started as an engineer. That was the only way in. And it's a really interesting story, because as an Eastern European, you're always perceived as an engineer, because that's our strength, right? We're good with math, but not so good with everything else. But hey, it doesn't matter, right? You get in how you get in, and then you work your way up. And I think that's the moral of the story. It's really hard to get in. It's really hard to work your way up. It's really easy to get in when you graduated from KPI because you have the technical engineering degree, but it's very hard to grow and move up because you don't have these other skills, the soft skills that you're going to learn here, the language skills, the business skills, entrepreneurial attitude, and all these things are going to help you move forward, going back to thinking big, right? So bias for action, a lot of times when I was at Nokia, as an engineer, as a QA engineer at that, I would say I would only do from A to B, because from B to C it's going to be someone else doing it, C to D. You have this really very small segment. You don't understand the big picture, going back to thinking big. You only understand this little part, and this is all I'm going to do. And this is a really naive and backwards way to look at things, because in order to succeed, you should be able to wear multiple hats and say, okay, maybe today I'm not going to do B2C, but I know how to get it done. I want to learn how to do better at B2C. And most importantly, as a company, we're not going to lose time going from B, waiting for someone else to go from B to C. I think what's really interesting in this one, it's very important for entrepreneurs, especially when some of you probably are not going to start as founders. And initially, you're going to work as early team members joining a startup. And a lot of times in startups, you have to wear multiple hats. And that's just the way it is, and you have to do it because smaller companies do not have the funding to support many roles. And a lot of times, even though you do engineering, you made up also. I used to manage packaging in my second job. What do I know about packaging? Just that it has colors. To me, there's only like 5 colors: red, blue, and green. Apparently, there's like eggshell and all these other things. And so anyways, you're going to have to be open-minded and have that bias for action. Frugality, I'm pretty sure Amazon just did that so we can save, take less, Uber, walk more, and spend a little less. A lot of companies do that. But again, you have to have common sense, and it goes back to ethics. If A and B brings the same effect, you pick the one that costs less. Because at the end of the day, the way they get you in a lot of these companies, they give you stock. And they make you believe that all these decisions you make, which is true, it's not just a belief, it's truth. If we all are frugal, the value of the stock is going to be much better. And that's true. And you have to make these right decisions. So as a family, as a group working for that particular company, the value of your stock is better. It's actually pretty common in most of the S&P 500 companies, especially if you end up in Silicon Valley, which is San Francisco, the area between San Francisco and San Jose. Those of you that ever try to look it up, it's very common for them to give you stock. It's extremely common to do that in startups. A lot of times they will say, we'll give you a small salary, but you'll get this much stock. And by the way, when it comes to that, I noticed from a personal experience from hiring for my startup, a lot of potential employees, potential team members are very hesitant to take stock, but this is the only opportunity for an individual in a new company to actually make pretty good money. I'm trying to see how many people looked at me when I said money. Okay, so the idea is that, of course, you have to do your due diligence, you have to vet all the companies, you have to make sure it's not a scam. But if you get, and you shouldn't be working for free by any means, but if the salary is reasonable for the market, and most importantly, reasonable in a place that has low cost of living, which Ukraine absolutely is reasonable for that, then sometimes it's worth the risk. But a lot of these startups, you know they're moving up or moving down within a year or two. So if you're working for someone, for a startup, on that very limited salary, and in a year you don't see that your value of your stock already grew to a higher level, it's certainly a red flag and requires reevaluation. The Ukrainian market is very unique, and I'll spend a little bit of time as an entrepreneur, someone who hired not just in Ukraine but all over the world to speak about the Ukrainian market. The cost of living is still low, and the proximity to Russia is pretty close, which puts it on a very unique position where the arbitrage still exists. Arbitrage meaning where you could get a lot of value for a little less cost. So it comes with the contained amount of risk, which can be tolerated by a lot of companies, but a lot of corporations and multinationals. We'll talk about it in a bit. Earn trust. Comes again with ethics. People know that your first few projects, especially your first one, is going to be very important. Everyone knows that the first year at a new job is going to be the most crucial year, the most hours you're going to put in, because that's where you're going to have to make your name. And if you don't, you'll basically be forgotten and going to have to jump to a new job, or you're going to have to get that second project that's pretty good. So remember that first job that you're going to get, which I don't know how many of you have. Does anyone work? So I worked at the, one of my jobs was at Bank of Art. I don't think it exists anymore.
Yes.
As customer care. They paid me a lot of money. It was about $50 a month. So it was, it was a lot at the time. And I think I made very poor decisions. I ended up spending all that $50 in 2 days. But luckily for me, I had parents that paid for it. Felt sorry for me, so gave me a little bit of money to survive the rest of the month. But it's important to, on that first corporate job that you move into, especially that first period of time, to give it your 110%, because that's how you're going to be remembered for the following few years. Dive deep is about the ability to learn, ability to dive deeper on the issue, ability to understand all the details. A lot of times, and you, especially in business, you'll see that a lot of people come in and they pretend to be experts on a certain subject. They pretend to know what they're talking about, but a lot of times you're throwing in, especially in consulting jobs. You guys heard of the Big Four? Does anyone know what the Big Four is? Please.
KPMG, you mean like a auditing company?
Ah, good question. Yes.
What exactly?
Because there was another Big Four, and now it's a Big Five. But let's talk about
Yeah, that's Ernst & Young, KPMG, Deloitte, and what is the second? First.
Price.
KPMG.
I'll give you the first word. Price. PwC.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't say that one, right? Yeah. And so in those jobs, those are very actually, I highly recommend you guys look for internships in those. It's probably going to be closer to your second, third year, because they're very international. And with that experience, you'll be able to pretty much land a job anywhere else. And I've had a lot of classmates that ended up working for them in Ukraine right after they graduated. They have 3 branches. Does anyone know what they do? What are the 3 branches?
They do consulting, financial consulting for the company. They do financial audit for
Right.
companies, like what they done, and the third one.
So it's only you got them, almost got them. So it's basically tax, accounting,
Yeah.
which is financial consulting, and it's business consulting. So the tax, they do that too, so they can file their taxes. Accounting is so they can file their 10K. Does anyone know what 10K is? So if you want to be a publicly traded company, you have to have checks and balances. You have to make sure that whatever accounting information you provide to the authorities, which is SEC. Does anyone know what SEC stands for? Does anyone watch TV? Does anyone know a TV show called Billy? Has anyone seen a TV show called Billions? It's a really good one. Has anyone seen Homeland? Homeland?
Villains are great.
Yeah, he's a British guy who's they got in trouble for with SEC, which is Securities and Exchange Commission.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to.
In the last season.
Huh?
Last season.
I'm behind. I'm sorry. I just watched 2 episodes and I think I'm an expert. See exactly. So it's basically the third branch is, but don't worry about the first 2. If you can get in on the first 2, that's great. But the third branch is business consulting, and that's usually the most interesting one. That's when they do a lot of consulting around the world for different companies in different areas. And the way it works is a lot of times they get thrown into areas they know nothing about, and they spend the first couple of months, a part of their billing goes a couple of months to learn about the subject. Have backbone, disagree, and commit. That's something genetic, actually. I can talk about this particular one for a very long time. A lot of people in Eastern Europe, they have what's called in psychology conflict avoidance. They a lot of times to avoid the conflict, they will go above and beyond to skip the conversation, not take the project, not take certain deadlines. It's actually something to watch out for. And but if you do disagree and you get overridden by someone, let's say you have a team and you disagreed with the team's decision and you voiced your opinion, but then at the end you voiced your opinion, but then at the end you were outvoted. You can't be like, oh hey, I'm just gonna be that guy who's gonna, what's the, I don't know English expression, palki v kolesa? Yeah, so you can't be that guy. You have to really do your best and try to support the team, even though that's not a decision that you pick. Deliver results, that's probably a good finale. At the end of the day, it's all about making the money, right? In the beginning of my career, I was in R&D and I thought I was very important. But then I realized that I was spending all this money. And then later on, you end up, I was lucky enough to get my MBA, to get my startup experience, and you have a very different perspective. You realize that business is not just about spending money on R&D, which happens quite a lot in Ukraine. We spend a lot of money to make value for Western or global companies. It's about also making money and figuring out how to manage a P&L. Anyone knows what P&L is?
Profit and loss.
There we go, good. So that's very important because at the end of the day, companies need to be profitable, they need to make money for their shareholders, and if you bring in results, you win. Okay, that's it. So I'll spend a couple of minutes on the curves that I brought to make this discovery. There's Jeff Bezos. So I saw this guy a couple of times. One time in Berlin at IFA, it's like CES, Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, but this one is in IFA, it's in Germany. And it's definitely a very interesting personality. Any questions? We have about 10 minutes. I want to make sure I answer your questions before we're going into more mumbo jumbo.
Can I ask you, like, actually, are there, if they actually are, some like maybe benefits or skills you understand you can gain only due to the fact that you was born here and actually you spend your childhood here? We live in a really unsteady environment here, like in different connections, in like politics, economic, and do you understand like this not like steady environment could possibly make you learn something?
Oh, how many of you are? That's a very good question, very deep. How many of you are from Kiev? Raise your hand. Okay, yeah, because the rest is not all the Kievnani are going to raise their hands, and then so most of you, it's only about if we don't count, probably if I say Kievskaya Oblast, then it's going to be more hands, more people pretend to be. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is a lot of us already made that, like myself, made that step to immigrate from a smaller city to the capital. So that's a very good skill. And as you move forward, as you evolve, as you get new jobs overseas and you continue moving, it gives you basically can adapt to new environments and new cultures much faster. That's a very important skill. If you're able to succeed moving from a small town, and the smaller the better really, even though you may not realize it now, that gives you more, propels you more to be able to adapt to that in a very new environment and take advantage of that. So that's one good skill. I mentioned, I joked a little bit about engineering, but you get in how you get in, and a lot of times, if you look at the world, right, it's very well positioned within certain industries. I'm not gonna do manufacturing in Ukraine. The infrastructure is not there because there's just, the roads are too bad to even get the product out from one city to another. There's no factories. There is a corruption rate, right? So for every area, there's a particular industry to keep in mind. So obviously, this one's really big is engineering. We have great engineers at KPI, but they have, not only they can't speak English, which is very true, they have very little business sense. And a lot of times it's important to have a good program manager, product manager from a school that understands English and can be that local representative. And I think that's a good way, a foot into a company that values engineering. And then as you grow, of course, you'll have many more opportunities. I'd say also, I'll constantly look, I think we talked about it briefly on the way here, the way to learn and to get either for your master's degree, if you choose not to stay at Concordia and go elsewhere, look for an opportunity for masters in the West. Most of the funding today comes from developed countries. We call them Western countries for whatever reason. For now, those are the Western countries, right? From China as well. And then to be able to understand. So when I hire PMs today, I frequently look for if they have a foreign degree or lived overseas for 5+ years. Because first of all, it's the skills. They may not have the right skills to tackle, to be that, have the product vision, but then most importantly, they don't have the pain points. If you're developing the product for this region, then it's okay. But if you're developing the product for the West, right, quote unquote, you need to have lived in the West to understand that. Otherwise, how are you going to develop a product? That's why it's important to get that education or experience. So I encourage you as you move through your undergrad, a year or two goes by, look for opportunities, even if it's a certificate. And the better the name, the bigger the name, the better, because it's going to look very good on your resume, and it's very hard to get your foot in the door if you don't have that. And unfortunately, I don't want to sound mean, but we do not simply have, outside of maybe a handful of schools that are barely recognized, there's just not enough schools that are recognized on the global level. I mean, I'm talking about people barely know MIT. They know Harvard and Stanford, maybe Oxford, but most people don't even know MIT. So imagine schools in Ukraine, they're probably not going to know those. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Good. Anything else? I want to do a quick.
You mentioned you had several startups. So you have business now.
I think I like to say once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. That's a good. No, I think so. You can be, a lot of times when you work with these companies, I recommend read up on corporate governance. It's a very senior class. Before my MBA, I had this misconception that that the companies are run by CEOs and the chief officer and all these officers. So that's not true. The company is actually run by the board. CEOs execute the direction, but the board actually sets the direction. And so once you work for a corporation, they actually force you to sign a document saying that whatever you develop as an employee is the property of that company. So especially someone like Amazon, I cannot run a company, but you can be on different boards. So that's allowed, because obviously you can't give that out because you may have some equity or whatever. So I had a startup, I was very inspired by my MBA. I did the one where you have to work for 10 years before you can go in. And again, it's all my, so create a LinkedIn account. If there's one thing you guys are gonna learn from today, just create a LinkedIn account if you want to be noticed. And a little bit, it's not Instagram, it's not Facebook. Don't post anything inappropriate there. Be very professional. But it's basically used for recruiting. I frequently, at least once a month, I get recruiters from Facebook, from Google. From all over the place. It is the tool that is being used globally to recruit and get jobs. And if there's one thing you want to take away from today's session is you want to have a LinkedIn account, you want to maintain it, you want to connect with the right people, and as you grow, maybe you want to post something useful. So, sorry, I digress. So the question was So I had a startup when I was doing my MBA. We're very inspired by all the new skills and knowledge, and we, with all my telecom experience, with a couple of partners, we founded a company called. They had several names, but it's basically a black phone. It's basically being able to use your cell phone without being tracked. And unfortunately, I wouldn't call it, it probably was a failed startup, because a lot of times, as you will learn in your class,
It was an experience.
unless it's, oh yeah, that too, yes, thanks, rubbing it in. But I think it was more that a successful startup is the one that's going to give you at least 10x. Even at least 3x to even considered for a medium startup. We broke even when we made a little bit of money, but normally it's very common. 9 out of 10 actually never get to 10x. Probably 2, 3 out of 10 get 3x. Maybe another 1 or 2 will break even maybe, and then the rest is going to fail. Most startups will fail, and like you said, the more experience you have, the more you will be able to anticipate that. You want to have good partners with different skills. We always frequently attract the same kinds of people with the same kind of skills, and that's great in personal lives, but it doesn't really help you much in the professional environment. You want to have different groups, different ages, different investments. I wanted to tell you, I can briefly mention a couple of words. In the beginning, you're gonna bootstrap all your businesses. Does anyone know what that means? So as you move forward, right, you have bootstrapping, then you move to seed money, then you get angel investors, then you get private venture capital, and then you get private equity, and then you go IPO. Initial public offering, everyone knows what that is. So those are all the stages you're going to have to do. Bootstrapping means you take your money that you and your partners had, your father's $10,000, whatever that is, and you put it into, or mother's, and you put it into a business, right? And that's called bootstrap. You're literally using your shoestrings to bootstrap a business. Then after that, you're going to get what's called seed money. Some people are going to come in and say, oh yeah, that looks interesting, I'm going to give you a little bit of money. And the term they use for that is seed money. Sometimes they give a loan, a convertible note. I think I had a file, but maybe next time I'll show you how they're calculated. So their discount rates and how they give them to you, they all expect to make a lot of money going out of those deals. So it's called seed money. After seed money, you get what is called series. A lot of usually angel investors and not private and venture capitalists would come in. Angel investor is usually an individual. Venture capital is usually a group of people that has a certain set of money, and they're going to invest in you. And then after that, it's private equity, which is like BlackRock and a lot of them very, very famous, Sequoia, and those are usually invested 100 million plus. So they don't even touch anything smaller. So, but between the bootstrap and the venture and the private equity, you're gonna have different Series A, Series B, and you get diluted more and more and more, and the value of stock is gonna be more, and it's always gonna be investors and bankers that are gonna make a lot of money. But that's okay. That's the cost of doing business, and you're gonna learn that. And hopefully through these classes, trainings, you'll get familiar with a lot of the terminology. So when you have your first couple of startups, no one's going to take advantage of you. You're going to know exactly what's going on and what's on the table. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very true.
Good, good. So yeah, so we broke even, and I'm happy, very happy. It was lasted about a year and a half. We ended up selling it to Polaroid. So yeah, but then Polaroid didn't do much with it either. But for us, it was a small win. At the time, I was already doing a consulting project. I lived in LA, it was a startup in LA, which is a beautiful place in California, a little more laid back than San Francisco. I got a really exciting project. For those of you that LTE was already pretty functional, 5G was coming out, LTE Advanced, and we were building a project for PlayStation, for Sony, to be able to play video games on your cell phones, to be able to stream video games. And we built the entire, so it was a consulting gig, we built an entire project. I went to Japan, I met with a bunch of Sony executives. And for those of you that have never been to Japan, raise your hand if you've been to more than 3 countries. Okay, so it's a lot of you, right? So but when you go to Europe, you go to Germany, you go to France, they're different, but they're not that different, right? You go to Latin America, you go to Brazil, you go to Argentina, they're different. Sure, they speak slightly different languages, but They're not that different. I always say to be a global person, you have to go to Japan at least once. If you go to Tokyo, there's nothing like it. It's a very unique culture. I highly advise. If there's a choice between A and Tokyo, go to Tokyo. No, A and Japan, go to Japan. Tokyo is obviously being the capital. It's so we ended up going to Japan, and there's a lot of bowing, as in they've in their culture they agree with you. They bow and they say yes, 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 but it doesn't necessarily mean yes. So we were waiting and waiting. We came back. We were waiting for funding for the project to go through. It went like a month or a month and a half went by, and I started to feel like I'm back at Nokia, where the Titanic just wasn't turning around fast enough. And I got a job offer to join Amazon, and I joined Amazon.
So now you feel more like self-releasing while working like corporate in the company, like in management of the company, rather than like operating your own. Yeah?
Oh well, those are two different. So I always like to talk about it as phases, right? So being a startup owner, there's a lot of highs and lows. It's like going gambling to Vegas, right? One day you were on top of the world and you got a new deal, the funding's coming, everything is great. The next day you broke. And you're like, oh my God, how are we gonna pay all these people? It's really challenging. So it's highs and lows, and when you get a little bit of tired of that, you want a little bit more stability. When I make a mistake at Amazon, you're like, oh, $100,000 lost. Oh, too bad. We'll do better next time. We'll write a report, analysis. We'll do better next time. When you do that in a startup, you're done. You have maybe one or two of those mistakes you make as a, thank you for rubbing it in, as a new entrepreneur, and you're out of business. And that's okay, but it's a different ball game. What's really interesting about Amazon specifically, it's very diverse. Raise your hand if you know any other company Amazon owns.
Amazon.
Any other company owned by Amazon.
Amazon Cloud.
Amazon Cloud? AWS? Oh my God, there's like 15 companies. You don't know a single company. Lydia, do you know one
I used
company?
Amazon twice on my life.
No, but they own like 15. Okay. Raise your hand if you know Twitch.
Yeah.
Owned by Amazon. Has anyone ever heard of Whole Foods?
Yeah.
Owned by Amazon.
Yeah, like in the San Francisco, yeah, there is Amazon Go.
Amazon Go, yeah. So
When
it's
you're able to
yeah.
go to the shop and just get
But
the
you know
food.
why we built it, right? So we can collect, we can fine-tune the algorithm. So Amazon Go is about identifying people in the store
And what they actually
and what they. So you come in, you scan your app, and you run in, you grab something. Like a friend of mine was really happy. He said, "I can buy something in 30 seconds." So he went in, picked it up, and he ran. And it's basically we collect all the data so we can improve the algorithm. Another one that's really big in Ukraine has engineering in Ukraine. Has anyone ever heard of Ring? Oh, okay, good. So they make doorbells. Okay, good. So there's like another 15 different companies and they do different things. So the beauty about Amazon, where I was going with this, it has different cultures. It's very agile. You can do different things. So it's not, even though you work at a big corporation, at times it doesn't feel like it because you work with a lot of individuals that have recently been acquired. So I've been doing a lot of some M&A work. Does anyone know what M&A is? Mergers and acquisitions. So obviously we don't do mergers. We don't do the A part of M&A. And just within Ring, we were able to acquire a handful of companies. I participated in those. I was at Amazon before we acquired several companies. I joined one of the acquiree, and within that acquiree, we acquired more companies. So you get a lot of individuals that, even though they now work for a big corporation, that have that mentality, the startup mentality, which is a good balance. I want to make sure I'm not. Well, we good on time? Let me know. Yeah. Any last questions?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Why isn't Amazon well developed in Ukraine? I mean, as a consumer, it's kind of bugging me that I can't buy anything. like, you have some products shipped, but most of them are kind of premium for,
Yeah.
third world countries, we'll say it that way.
I think we'll let Rozietka do the gain the market
But
share
I
and then
mean,
just buy
it's
it.
just Amazon offers more, so it's kind of like.
Yeah.
It has shipping, but in general, most
Right.
of the products are available.
Yeah.
So,
It's a very good question. I think it's a combination of things. It's
so what are the issues? That's kind of thing.
so. Well, what do you think are the issues as a business person? Can you name one or two? I mean, I'm speculating. I'm not in the department.
That's kind of the one that's.
Oh yeah, sure. You have to be. You need to have the right culture, so the packages are not getting stolen. The packages are being honestly returned. You have to have the infrastructure to deliver the roads to deliver the packages. You have to have warehousing employees, which is not a problem. You can build it all, but I think it will happen. And also another really big one, which everyone has to be very careful about, is customer data, because a lot of we always have to be very sensitive about customer data due to the geopolitical issues in this region. So that's another one that's pretty big.
Yeah, the rhythm.
I think it will happen because we've been looking at, a lot of times. I have a friend one of my classmates who lives in Burma, Myanmar, in Myanmar, and he's basically building up Rozietka or whatever.com, right, .ru, so he could infrastructure so then Amazon can come in and buy him. So that's another strategy. A lot of times you let the local companies figure it out. It has to be a big enough market for the investment. It has to be the right time. Okay. Good. I think this was it. Okay. Thank you guys.